The exact moment the judge addressed me by my former military rank, the million-dollar smirk vanished from the face of my mother-in-law. She had spent 6 months trying to destroy my life with the absolute certainty that I was a weak target, easily crushed in a courtroom. She was about to learn the bitterest lesson of her life. Never declare war on a woman who spent her prime locking corrupt men behind bars. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Ella Perez. I am 35 years old, and until recently, I believed my life in Austin, Texas, was securely built on a foundation of hard work, logic, and professional success. I work as a senior consultant at Vanguard Strategic Solutions, a highly respected corporate firm where strategy is everything and emotions are checked at the door. But absolutely no corporate strategy in the world could have prepared me for the sheer weight of the heavy manila envelope dropped onto my pristine glass desk on a blistering Tuesday afternoon. It was a litigation file, thick enough to double as a doorstop. The legal courier who delivered it could not even look me in the eye as he handed it over. The plaintiff listed on the first page was not a disgruntled client or a rival consulting firm. It was my own mother-in-law, Valerie Sterling. Valerie was a notorious institution in Austin. She was a real estate tycoon whose family name was plastered across luxury high-rises, sprawling commercial developments, and exclusive country clubs throughout the state. She operated with the kind of ruthless, suffocating arrogance that only came with generations of untouchable wealth. According to the towering stack of legal documents now sitting before me, Valerie was suing me. The charges were absurdly dramatic and incredibly dangerous. She was accusing me of fraud, embezzlement, and the malicious misappropriation of the Sterling family assets. The pure audacity of the lawsuit was breathtaking, because the reality of the situation was the exact opposite. I was the one who had quietly initiated the agonizing process of divorcing her golden boy son, Julian, just a few weeks prior. I had uncovered the ugly, undeniable truth about my marriage. Julian was not just having a sordid affair. He had been systematically siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars from our joint savings accounts to fund his secret, extravagant life with his mistress. When I confronted him with the bank statements, he panicked. But instead of facing the consequences of his betrayal like a grown man, he ran straight to his mother, Valerie, ever the apex predator of the local elite, decided that the best defense for her precious son was a nuclear offense. She wanted to strike preemptively. She needed to paint me as a greedy, manipulative villain to protect her family reputation and, more importantly, their massive fortune before I could expose Julian in divorce court. Tucked inside the aggressive, threatening legal jargon of the lawsuit was a settlement agreement. It was less of a genuine offer and more of a hostile demand for surrender. The terms were profoundly insulting. Valerie demanded that I sign away everything. She wanted me to walk away with absolutely nothing. $0, no claim to the house we built together, no share of our joint investments, not even a fraction of the assets I had personally earned and contributed to over the years. If I signed it, I would leave the marriage entirely destitute. The cover letter attached from her high-powered, incredibly expensive legal team made the alternative perfectly clear. If I chose to fight back, Valerie would use every single ounce of her wealth, power, and influence to completely obliterate my reputation. She promised a smear campaign so vicious in public that I would never be able to find work in the corporate world again. Where was my husband during all of this intimidation? Julian was a ghost. He was 37 years old, but behaved exactly like a frightened child hiding behind his wealthy mother. He let her fight his battles, refusing to answer any of my phone calls or text messages. He completely abandoned our home and allowed Valerie to use her immense network of connections to turn the screws on me professionally. Her reach within the city was terrifyingly vast. Within exactly 48 hours of the lawsuit being filed, The atmosphere at Vanguard Strategic Solutions shifted drastically. Valerie had made strategic, quiet phone calls to the senior partners at my firm. They were subtle conversations wrapped in the polite venom of the Southern upper class. But the underlying message was incredibly clear to everyone. Employing Ella Perez was suddenly a massive liability. The senior partners called me into a soundproof meeting room with frosted glass walls. They did not outright fire me, but the pressure in the room was suffocating. "Your continued presence here is becoming a complication for our regional relationships," the managing partner told me, refusing to meet my gaze. They strongly suggested I take an indefinite, unpaid leave of absence. They heavily hinted that a swift, quiet surrender to the Sterling family would be in the best interest of everyone involved. They wanted me to step down so they would not lose the lucrative development contracts Valerie controlled. The isolation was absolute. The ultra-rich of Austin had quickly closed ranks around their own, leaving me standing completely alone on the outside. A normal person might have cracked under the immense pressure. They might have broken down in tears right there in the corporate boardroom. They might have taken to the internet, posting angry, emotionally charged messages on social media to expose Julian and Valerie to the public. But I did not shed a single tear. I did not log into my accounts to type out a frantic, desperate defense. I gave them exactly nothing. Valerie Sterling truly believed she was dealing with a regular corporate employee who would crumble under the terrifying threat of financial ruin. She did not know about my past. I chose a path of absolute silence. I packed my personal belongings into a small box and walked out of the office with my head held high. I returned to the empty house that I was about to lose, walked into my home office, and shut the door. The silence in the room matched the cold. Quiet focus, settling over my mind. For the next 72 hours, I barely slept. I systematically organized every single piece of evidence I had gathered. I compiled the bank statements, the wire transfers, and the digital footprints Julian had foolishly left behind. I was preparing my weapons in the dark, ready to show them exactly what happens when you push the wrong woman into a corner. The mediation took place on the 55th floor of a downtown skyscraper inside a law firm so ostentatiously wealthy that the lobby smelled of imported mahogany and fresh intimidation. The conference room they had booked was massive, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Texas Capitol. It was a physical manifestation of power designed specifically to make anyone sitting on the opposite side of the sprawling oak table feel incredibly small. When I walked through the heavy double doors, the atmosphere was thick with calculated arrogance. Valerie was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by 3 men in bespoke charcoal suits. These were the apex predators of the corporate legal world, billable at over $1,000 an hour. Valerie herself looked like she was attending a coronation rather than a legal mediation. She wore a pristine white tailored suit, her posture rigid with triumph, sipping sparkling water from a crystal glass. I walked in carrying only a simple leather portfolio. There was no high-priced attorney walking beside me. There was no paralegal carrying boxes of defense files. I was completely alone. The lead attorney, a man with slicked back hair and a predatory smile, let out a soft, condescending chuckle as I pulled out my chair. He did not even bother to stand and greet me. "Are we expecting anyone else?" the lawyer asked, his tone dripping with fake politeness. "Perhaps your representation is stuck in traffic?" "I am representing myself today," I replied softly, keeping my voice intentionally low and entirely devoid of confidence. Valerie laughed out loud. It was a harsh scraping sound echoing off the glass walls. "Oh, this is simply pathetic," she sneered, leaning forward. "You are in way over your head. I expected you to at least hire one of those cheap strip mall lawyers to delay the inevitable. But coming here alone? You must be absolutely terrified." I kept my eyes downcast, staring at the polished wood of the table, letting them believe her assessment was completely accurate. Silence. I had learned long ago makes arrogant people want to fill the void with their own perceived brilliance. "Let us get straight to the point and end this charade," the lead lawyer announced. He slid a thick, glossy binder across the table. It stopped precisely in front of my hands. We have spent the last 3 weeks conducting a forensic audit of your marital finances. The results are highly disturbing. We have undeniable proof that you have been systematically draining joint accounts and funneling the capital into private, undisclosed holding companies. I slowly opened the binder. Inside were dozens of pages of bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and investment portfolios. According to these documents, I had secretly moved over $400,000 during the last 18 months. I stared at the pages, letting my eyes widen. On the surface, I projected absolute panic. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages. But beneath that carefully constructed facade of a cornered, desperate woman, my mind was operating with the cold, surgical precision of a seasoned investigator. It took me exactly 45 seconds to realize the documents were completely fabricated, and they were not even fabricated well. My trained eyes immediately caught the fatal errors. They had listed wire transfers clearing on federal holidays, which is a banking impossibility. They had fabricated routing numbers that corresponded to credit unions in the Pacific Northwest, completely mismatching the regional bank logos printed at the top of the statements. Even worse, the signature on the authorization forms was a sloppy digital overlay of my signature from a mortgage document signed 3 years ago. It was a clumsy, arrogant setup. They believed I was just a clueless corporate consultant who would see the official-looking letterhead and surrender out of sheer terror. "I do not understand," I whispered, letting my voice shake just enough to sound authentic. "These dates do not make any sense. And this money, I never authorized these transfers. Where did these records even come from?" The lawyer smirked, exchanging a victorious glance with Valerie. My feigned confusion was exactly what they wanted. It emboldened them to reveal more of their hand. "These are certified financial records," the lawyer lied, smoothly leaning back in his expensive leather chair. "If this goes to a trial, a judge will look at these documents and see a calculating fraudster. You will face a minimum of 5 to 10 years in a state penitentiary for this level of grand larceny. However, my client is a merciful woman. She wishes to avoid a public spectacle." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the total surrender agreement. "Sign the waiver," he commanded. "You walk away from the marriage with 0 assets. No alimony, no property claims, nothing. In exchange, we bury this evidence and let you slink away to start over somewhere else." Valerie could no longer contain her glee. She rested her elbows on the table, fixing me with a venomous glare. "You are nothing but a lucky gold digger," she hissed, her voice dripping with sheer contempt. "You managed to trick my son into a ring, but you are out of your depth playing games with me. You do not belong in our world. You never did. If you do not sign that paper right now, I will personally ensure you are completely erased from high society. You will never work in this state again. I will crush you so thoroughly, you will not even be able to rent a studio apartment in the worst part of town." I looked at her, then down at the fraudulent documents, and finally at the waiver demanding my complete financial ruin. I took a slow, deep breath, maintaining the illusion of a broken spirit. I closed the binder and gently pushed the waiver back toward the center of the table. "I need 24 hours to review these claims," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You have until tomorrow morning at 9. Valerie snapped, her eyes blazing with triumphant fire. "After that, I destroy you." I stood up slowly, clutching my empty portfolio, and walked out of the opulent conference room without looking back. To Valerie and her high-priced legal team, I looked exactly like a defeated woman marching toward the execution block. But as the elevator doors closed, and I began my rapid descent to the ground floor, a genuine smile finally spread across my face. They had just handed me the very weapon I needed. The forged documents were not just threats. They were tangible, prosecutable evidence of a criminal conspiracy to commit fraud. I walked out of that skyscraper with a submissive exterior, but inside I had secured the exact ammunition required to burn their entire empire to the ground. The morning of the trial arrived with an oppressive humidity that felt heavy even inside the air-conditioned corridors of the county courthouse. It was precisely 9 o'clock in the morning when the heavy oak doors of courtroom number 4 swung open. The gallery behind the wooden railing was not filled with the usual assortment of bored law students or random citizens. Instead, it looked like a VIP section at the most exclusive charity gala in Austin. Valerie had apparently treated this trial as a spectator sport, She had invited over 24 of her wealthy socialite friends, real estate developers, and country club acquaintances to witness my public execution. They sat in the wooden pews, wearing designer silk blouses and expensive tailored suits, whispering behind manicured hands as they waited for the show to begin. I walked in and took my seat at the defense table. I was entirely alone. There was no co-counsel sitting beside me. There was no paralegal passing me sticky notes. There was just me, a single yellow legal pad, and a black pen. I sat with my back perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly on the table, staring straight ahead. The whispers from the gallery grew louder, buzzing like a hive of angry hornets as they judged my solitary presence. They mistook my silence for submission and my stillness for pure terror. 10 minutes later, the side door opened and Valerie made her grand entrance. She did not walk, she glided. She was dressed in a dark navy suit that screamed wealth and dominance, projecting the aura of a reigning queen arriving to survey her conquered territory. Her chin was tilted upward, her gaze sweeping over the gallery to acknowledge her loyal subjects with a brief, confident nod. Trailing 2 steps behind her was my soon-to-be ex-husband, Julian. He wore a crisp gray suit, but his posture was completely defeated. His shoulders were slumped and he kept his eyes glued to the polished linoleum floor. He was a 37-year-old man behaving like a frightened child being led by the hand. Not once during his walk to the plaintiff table did he dare to look in my direction. He knew what he had done, and his cowardice was palpable. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, asking everyone to rise. The judge, a stern-looking man with decades of experience etched into the deep lines of his face, took his seat at the bench. He adjusted his glasses and began reviewing the preliminary case files laid out before him, flipping through the pages with a heavy frown. "We are here for the matter of Sterling versus Perez," the judge announced, his voice booming through the large room. "Is the plaintiff ready to proceed?" The slick-lit attorney, whom I had met at the mediation, immediately stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "We are ready, Your Honor," he declared, stepping out from behind his table to command the center of the room. He began his opening statement pacing slowly back and forth, a theatrical performance designed entirely for the wealthy audience sitting in the gallery. For the next 20 minutes, he systematically tore my character to shreds. He painted a masterful fiction describing me not as a hard-working corporate consultant, but as a highly calculating psychological manipulator. "Your Honor," the attorney said, his voice dripping with fabricated sorrow, "the woman sitting alone at the defense table is a master of deception. She identified a kind, trusting man from a prominent family and embedded herself into his life with one singular goal: financial exploitation. We will present evidence showing how she abused my client trust, slowly isolating him from his protective mother, while secretly funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars out of their shared marital estate to enrich herself." A loud collective gasp echoed from the gallery. Valerie dabbed the corner of her dry eye with a lace handkerchief, playing the part of the heartbroken matriarch to absolute perfection. She thought she could hide her tracks. The lawyer continued, pointing an accusatory finger directly at me. She thought her corporate background made her smarter than the law. But today we will expose the truth. We ask the court to hold this predator accountable for the severe financial and emotional damage she has inflicted upon the Sterling family. He returned to his seat, wearing a deeply satisfied smirk. Valerie patted his arm in approval. The courtroom felt incredibly tense. The air was thick with their perceived victory. They had set the stage perfectly, and they were simply waiting for the judge to drop the hammer on a defenseless woman. The judge looked down at me over the rim of his glasses. "Ms. Perez," he said, his tone neutral, but carrying a hint of pity, "as you are representing yourself, it is now your turn. Do you have an opening statement for the court?" I placed my pen down on the yellow legal pad. I placed both hands flat on the wooden table and slowly stood up. The fragile, intimidated facade I had maintained for weeks instantly evaporated. I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin. When I finally spoke, my voice did not shake. It was not the soft, frightened whisper they had heard in the mediation room. My voice rang out with crystal-clear projection, carrying the undeniable weight of absolute authority. "Yes, Your Honor." I said, my tone so sharp and commanding that the entire gallery instantly fell dead silent. "I do have a statement, And before this court wastes another single minute on these fabricated fairy tales, we need to address the massive criminal conspiracy sitting at the plaintiff table. The judge frowned heavily, his eyes darting from me to the thick file his clerk had just handed him moments before my statement. The courtroom remained dead silent as he opened the manila folder I had submitted to the court precisely 24 hours prior. This was not the fraudulent financial binder Valerie had created. This was my actual dossier. The judge adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the heavily stamped cover page and the official government seals trailing down the documents. The deep lines on his face shifted. The look of bored pity completely vanished, replaced instantly by a rigid posture of absolute, undeniable respect. He slowly closed the folder, folded his hands together, and looked directly at me. "I must apologize for the oversight," the judge said, his voice completely devoid of its earlier condescension. "The court recognizes Major Perez. You may proceed with your defense, Major." The collective gasp that ripped through the gallery was deafening. The lead attorney for the plaintiff dropped his expensive gold pen onto the hardwood table with a loud clatter. He turned his head so fast he nearly snapped his own neck. Valerie froze entirely, her triumphant smile shattering into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. "Major," the lead attorney sputtered, stumbling over his own words as he pushed himself up from his chair. "Your Honor, there must be some mistake. The defendant is a corporate consultant. She has absolutely no legal standing or military background listed in any of our extensive background checks. That is because my actual operational files are sealed under federal clearance," I replied smoothly, turning my body to face the plaintiff table. For 8 years before moving to the private sector, I served as a senior military prosecutor in the Judge Advocate General Corps. My primary jurisdiction was not petty theft. I specialized in dismantling highly complex international economic crimes, investigating defense contractor fraud, and interrogating high-level military personnel accused of grand larceny. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the room. The air in the courtroom grew incredibly heavy. I have spent the prime years of my life locking highly intelligent, deeply corrupt men behind bars. I continued, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "So when your legal team presented me with bank statements showing wire transfers clearing on federal holidays and routing numbers that physically do not exist in the southern United States, I was not terrified. I was frankly insulted by the profound laziness of your forgery." The lead attorney turned pale. He sank slowly back into his chair, furiously whispering to his 2 associates, who were frantically shuffling through their own papers. Valerie gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning bone white. As the horrifying reality of her situation began to dawn on her, she had not cornered a helpless corporate worker. She had declared war on an apex predator. "Your Honor," I said, turning back to the bench, "at this time, the defense calls Julian Sterling to the stand." Julian looked like he was about to be physically sick. He looked desperately at his mother, but Valerie was too paralyzed by shock to offer him any guidance. Slowly, his legs trembling visibly through his expensive gray trousers, he stood up and made the agonizing walk to the witness box. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the whole truth, and sat down. Sweat was already beading on his forehead. "Good morning, Julian," I said, approaching the podium with my single yellow legal pad. I did not even look at my notes. I had memorized every single digit. "Let us discuss the missing $400,000. According to your sworn deposition, you discovered these missing funds in early October of last year. Is that correct?" "Yes," Julian choked out, his voice barely a squeak. "That is correct. And according to Plaintiff Exhibit A, which your legal team submitted to this court today, I allegedly wired $50,000 to a private offshore holding company on the 4th of July. "Yes." He swallowed hard, looking toward his lawyer. "You did." "Julian, you are a businessman," I said, leaning casually against the wooden podium. "Can you explain to this court how I managed to force a federal wire transfer to clear on Independence Day, a national federal holiday when all banking institutions, the Federal Reserve, and international clearinghouses are legally mandated to be closed?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. The wealthy socialites in the gallery were no longer whispering. They were holding their breath. "I object," the lead lawyer stammered, standing up halfway. "Relevance." "Overruled," the judge snapped immediately, leaning forward to glare at Julian. "The witness will answer the question." "I do not know how the banking system works," Julian whispered, his face turning a dark shade of crimson. "Let us move on to another date," I continued, my tone relentless and driving. "You claimed I withdrew $120,000 in a cashier check on the 15th of November, but my military pension records, which are now entered into evidence, show that on the 15th of November, I was speaking at a closed-door symposium at the Pentagon in Washington, District of Columbia. Are you testifying under oath that I was simultaneously in two cities located over 1,300 miles apart?" "I might have gotten the dates confused," Julian panicked, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his trembling hand. "You did not confuse the dates, Julian. You fabricated them to cover your own tracks," I stated, my voice turning to ice. "Because on the 15th of November, someone did withdraw exactly $120,000 from our joint account, but it was not me. I have subpoenaed the security camera footage from the downtown bank branch. Would you like me to play the video for the court? Or would you like to admit right now that you were the one standing at the teller window?" Julian stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute terror. The psychological pressure of a military interrogation is designed to break hardened criminals. Julian was just a spoiled heir who had never faced a real consequence in his entire 37 years of life. He was crumbling right before my eyes. "And after you took that money," I pressed, stepping closer to the witness stand, removing all physical distance to amplify his panic, "you did not put it into a hidden account of mine. You used it to purchase a luxury condominium on the east side of town, a condominium deeded exclusively to a woman named Camille Vaughn." "Who is Camille Vaughn, Julian?" "She is just a friend," he stammered, tears literally welling in his eyes. "A friend?" I raised my eyebrows, my voice slicing through the air like a razor. "You secretly drained our marital assets to buy a luxury property, purchase a sports car, and fund lavish international vacations for a friend? Remember that you are under oath, and perjury carries a mandatory prison sentence. I will ask you one final time. Who is Camille Vaughn, and why did you wire her over $400,000 of marital funds?" The threat of prison broke him completely. Julian slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, completely sobbing into the microphone. "She is my girlfriend," Julian wailed, his voice cracking horribly. "I took the money. I gave it all to Camille. I just wanted to leave, but my mother told me if I framed you, we could keep the rest of the estate. Please, I did not want to do it. My mother made me do it." A collective gasp of absolute horror erupted from the gallery. I slowly turned my head to look at the plaintiff table. Valerie was no longer the arrogant queen of Austin society. Her face was completely drained of blood, her mouth hanging open in utter devastation. She sat frozen as she watched her precious golden child dig his own grave, confessing to grand larceny, fraud, and conspiracy, right on the witness stand for the entire world to see. Julian's confession hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket of guilt that finally smothered the arrogant sneers of the gallery. But I was not finished. A confession of infidelity and petty theft was merely the appetizer. I was there to serve the main course. I turned away from my sobbing husband, walked back to my defense table, and picked up a third, significantly thicker file. "Your Honor," I addressed the bench, my voice slicing through the residual murmurs of the stunned courtroom. The $400,000 funneled to the mistress was merely a smokescreen. It was a pathetic distraction orchestrated by the plaintiff to conceal a much larger, far more sinister operation. I would like to submit Defense Exhibit C into evidence. This is a comprehensive forensic trace of the Sterling family financial network over the past 12 months. The court clerk took the heavy stack of papers and handed it to the judge. I handed a duplicate copy to the lead attorney, who took it as if it were a live explosive. "Using my federal clearance and established international banking contacts," I continued, pacing slowly and deliberately in front of the jury box. I conducted a deep dive into the corporate holdings of Valerie Sterling. I discovered that precisely 3 weeks before filing this frivolous lawsuit against me, she initiated a massive, coordinated liquidation of marital assets. We are not talking about a few $100,000. We are talking about $12 million. The lead attorney shot up from his chair. "Objection, Your Honor. This is completely outside the scope of the current pleadings. This is a civil dispute regarding alleged misappropriation by the defendant, not a corporate audit of my client. The defense is trying to turn a simple family matter into a federal witch hunt." I did not even look at him. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the judge. "Your Honor, under the Texas Rules of Evidence, Rule 404, evidence of a larger scheme or plan is absolutely admissible to prove intent. Furthermore, under the Texas Family Code, any attempt to artificially deflate a marital estate prior to a divorce filing constitutes fraud on the community. Valerie Sterling manufactured this lawsuit to legally freeze my access to our shared assets, while she systematically moved $12 million into 3 offshore shell companies located in the Cayman Islands. I have provided the exact routing numbers, the corporate registry documents, and the digital signatures linking Valerie directly to those secret accounts. The judge flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing deeper and deeper with every single line he read. The undeniable proof was staring him right in the face. "Objection overruled," the judge barked, glaring at the plaintiff table with absolute disgust. "Sit down, counselor. The defense is entirely within her rights, and frankly, you should be taking notes." The expensive lawyer collapsed into his seat, running a trembling hand through his slick hair. The 3 men in bespoke suits looked exactly like they were standing on the deck of a rapidly sinking ship. They were completely outmatched, and they knew it. I had cornered them with undeniable, cold, hard data. To execute a financial transfer of that massive magnitude, Valerie needed my signature, I explained, letting the gravity of the situation sink into the quiet courtroom. As a legal co-owner of the primary investment portfolio, my authorization was strictly mandatory, but as we have already established today, I never signed anything, which brings us to the final, indisputable piece of evidence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small digital audio recorder. "Your Honor, the state of Texas is a one-party consent state regarding audio recordings. Before moving out of my marital home, I activated the motion-censored security cameras located in the living room. These cameras were installed by me, registered in my name, and operate within a residence where I had a legal expectation of privacy. Last month, exactly 48 hours before this lawsuit was filed, my husband and his mother had a very interesting conversation in my living room. I have submitted the authenticated audio file and the certified legal transcripts to the court." I pressed the play button and held the device close to the microphone on the wooden podium. The sound quality was pristine. The acoustics of the empty living room amplified every desperate breath Julian took and every venomous syllable his mother spat out. "I cannot do it, Mother." Julian's recorded voice echoed through the courtroom, sounding frantic and incredibly weak. "She is going to notice the money is gone. She is a consultant. She looks at numbers all day long. We are going to get caught." Then came the cold, calculating voice of Valerie Sterling. "Stop whining, Julian. You are acting like a complete coward. I have already drafted the transfer forms. All you have to do is forge her signature exactly like I showed you. We move the $12 million offshore by Friday, and then we hit her with the embezzlement suit on Tuesday. By the time she tries to hire a lawyer to defend herself, she will be completely broke. She will have absolutely no choice but to sign the surrender waiver and walk away with nothing." I clicked the recorder off. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. It was the undeniable sound of a dynasty collapsing under its own arrogance. Valerie completely snapped. Her pristine, aristocratic facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. She sprang to her feet, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. But she did not attack me. She turned violently toward her own legal team. "Do something!" she shrieked, slamming her fists onto the polished wooden table. I pay you people $1,000 an hour. Object to it. Throw it out. Destroy her right now." The lead attorney physically recoiled from her, holding his hands up in a desperate, defensive gesture. "Valerie, sit down," he hissed frantically, looking terrified of the judge. "You are making it worse. We cannot defend this." "You are utterly useless," she screamed, her voice bordering on completely hysterical. "I will ruin you. I will ruin all of you. You told me she was nobody." The gallery erupted into absolute chaos. The wealthy socialites were gasping, whispering furiously, and clutching their expensive handbags. Several of them were already standing up and edging toward the heavy oak doors, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Sterling name before the press got wind of the scandal. Julian was still weeping softly in the witness box, completely ignored by his manic, screaming mother. "Order in the court!" the judge roared, slamming his wooden gavel down with tremendous, echoing force. "I said order right now!" It took 3 more deafening strikes of the gavel before the room finally settled into a terrified, heavy silence. Valerie stood panting, her chest heaving, glaring around the room like a trapped, vicious animal. The judge leaned over the heavy wooden bench, his eyes narrowed into furious, unforgiving slits. "Madam, you will sit down and remain completely silent, or I will have the bailiff place you in handcuffs right this second." Valerie slowly sank into her chair, the fight finally draining out of her as the terrifying gravity of the judge's words took hold. "I have been sitting on this bench for 25 years, the judge stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the entire room. "And I have rarely witnessed such a blatant, malicious, and arrogant abuse of the judicial system. You did not just attempt to steal from your daughter-in-law. You attempted to use my courtroom as a weapon to facilitate a massive criminal enterprise." He pointed his pen directly at Valerie and then over at Julian. "Let me make this perfectly clear to both of you. The civil matters of this divorce and asset dispute are no longer my primary concern. I am immediately forwarding every single piece of evidence presented today, including the forensic audits and the audio recordings, directly to the district attorney and the federal authorities. You are both looking at severe, multi-count indictments for perjury, forgery, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. I highly suggest you do not attempt to leave the state." The judge did not hesitate for another second. He raised his heavy wooden gavel and brought it down with a finality that echoed like a gunshot through the massive room. "I am officially dismissing this plaintiff's lawsuit with extreme prejudice," the judge declared, his voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "Furthermore, I am drafting an immediate judicial referral to the office of the district attorney. A full criminal investigation will be opened into Valerie Sterling and Julian Sterling, effective immediately. The court will ensure that your financial assets remain frozen pending the federal inquiry. Court is adjourned." The fallout was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic for the Sterling family. The dominoes I had carefully lined up over the past few weeks finally fell, crushing their entire world with terrifying speed. Julian, who had spent his entire life coasting on his family wealth and his mother's protection, suddenly found himself facing a very grim reality. He remained slumped in the witness box, completely paralyzed by the horrifying prospect of a federal prison sentence. The moment the news of his impending criminal indictment leaked to the public, his precious mistress, Camille Vaughn, packed her bags. She completely abandoned the luxury condominium he had purchased with my money, changed her phone number, and vanished without a trace. Julian was left entirely alone, staring down multiple felony charges with $0 to his name and absolutely no inheritance left to save him. Valerie suffered an even more spectacular collapse. The Austin elite, who had eagerly crowded into the courtroom gallery to watch my demise, practically tripped over themselves running to the exits. They immediately pulled out their cell phones, frantically calling their financial managers to sever all ties. By the time the sun set that evening, the Sterling real estate empire was bleeding capital at an unprecedented rate. Major corporate partners withdrew their funding from her commercial developments. Her lucrative city contracts were suspended indefinitely pending the criminal fraud investigation. The $12 million she had tried to hide in the Cayman Islands was seized by federal authorities in a matter of mere hours. Her untouchable legacy was reduced to a toxic liability standing on the absolute brink of bankruptcy. As I packed my single yellow legal pad and walked out of the heavy double doors of the courtroom, I found Valerie waiting for me in the quiet marble hallway. She was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, untouchable queen of Austin high society was entirely gone. In her place stood a trembling, broken woman. Her expensive navy suit looked rumpled, and her hands shook violently as she stepped cautiously into my path. "Ella, please," Valerie begged, her voice a fragile, desperate whisper that echoed in the empty corridor. "Please wait. We can settle this privately. I will give you whatever you want. I will give you half of the entire estate. I will give you the house and the investment portfolios. Just call off the federal investigators. Tell the judge it was a massive misunderstanding. If I go to prison, my entire life is over. I am begging you to show some mercy to our family." I stopped and looked at her. I felt absolutely no pity, no anger, and no sorrow. I only felt the cold, hard satisfaction of justice finally taking its proper course. "You did not offer me any mercy when you tried to leave me with $0 and a destroyed reputation," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and incredibly steady. "You truly thought you could buy your way through life, crushing anyone who inconvenienced you, but you cannot buy your way out of a federal indictment. Valerie, you are going to lose everything, and you have absolutely no one to blame but yourself." She let out a choked sob. Reaching a trembling hand toward my arm, I stepped back, keeping myself completely out of her reach. "Let this be the final lesson you ever learned from me," I said, looking directly into her tear-filled eyes. "Never underestimate the devastating power of a woman who chooses to live in silence. While you were busy making noise and throwing your money around to intimidate me, I was quietly building the exact cage you are about to live in." I turned my back on her and walked down the long marble corridor, her quiet sobs echoing behind me. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the blazing Texas sunlight. The oppressive heat felt incredibly refreshing. I walked to my car, slid behind the steering wheel, and took a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in 18 months, I felt completely free. I started the engine and drove away from the wreckage of the Sterling family, heading toward a brand new life. I had lost a cheating husband and a toxic mother-in-law, but I had reclaimed my absolute pride, proving once and for all that true justice always belongs to those who have the patience to prepare for it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.